We've had some awesome talks this morning so far, so yeah, lovely to see you all out there. I think, Max mentioned that I've been in this world for quite some time, 30 years to be precise, 32 actually. And when I first started creating and collecting and exploring data, it was via these punch cards. I actually punched cards. That was the only way you could get data into a computer. And now we have data in the cloud. Amazing. 30 years is actually a very short time to go to progress like that. But on reflection and looking back over these years and talking to a lot of my fellow BI like-minded people, thanks Margot, not much has actually changed in some respects. We still deal with enormous amounts of data, and we are still looking for what we really, really want to know. What we've really just done is make that circle a lot bigger. So what we really sort of were thinking about is, why is it that we still battle? Why is it that we still spend a lot of time trying to find and search for and build all of these BI installations, all of our data warehouses, our analytics? And what really struck me was that the work that we do is not linear. So you may think that that's fairly self-explanatory and not a terribly clever thought. But if that's the case, if we know that the work that we do is not linear, how is it that every single model that we build to try and define and communicate the work that we do ends up being fairly linear? Our trusty organogram, this we use a lot, and a whole lot of boxes and a couple of arrows. For those of us who build data warehouses, a very typical looking data warehouse architecture, from source all the way through the stages, and out pops a pretty graph at the other end. If there's any business process engineers in the audience, you'll recognize this as a nice, normal business process diagram. And of course, our much-loved star schema. Coupled with my slightly pet-hate data information knowledge insight continuum, which we will dig into a little later. But if you look at all of these, they're all linear. They all have a starting point and an end point, and they just kind of go in one direction, and they don't cross back and feedback and confuse and everything. And I'm not sure about your projects that you're working on. Maybe I'm alone in this, but my day consists of hundreds and hundreds of emails, phone calls, complex problems to solve, and it's all muddled up, and it's not nearly as neat as all these diagrams that I have pinned up on my partition wall. Looks a little bit more like this. So perhaps we need to start thinking about a new way of trying to understand what the real world looks like and how we're going to tackle this problem and move forward. But first, let's just go step back a little bit into this much publicized continuum of knowledge. So we start with data. We all know we have lots of it. It's raw, it's difficult to use. And by some sort of almost magic, like we've heard before, we turn it into information. We add some more context, we summarize it, we connect it with other pieces of data, and that produces some information. And we're pretty good at this. We do it. We've been doing it for many years, and we almost kind of get to this point of going, right, that's the end of our job in the BI department. And we sort of hand it over to the business users, and now by some incredible thing, they become knowledgeable, and they can use this information and add their business acumen, their judgment, their experience, and out pops knowledge. It's a wonderful thing when it happens. It's not as neat and as simple as the diagram shows. And then, of course, we all have the goal of the insight, the understanding of why. Why did something happen? Up till now, we've understood the what, the where, the who, the how. And at this point, we are now starting to understand the why. And what must we do next? And yes, this is a great goal, and it's nothing that we can say we shouldn't do. But we need to really understand what it is and how we get there. And of course, at the other end, which we don't often draw, is action. If we know all of this information, if we've made those wonderful decisions and we've got the insight, what do we do next? And why is it that we don't often take that action? And we'll touch on that a little later. But what's really happening along the way? Well, as we move along this continuum, we're gaining more and more understanding. We've gone from some raw bits and bytes and columns and tables, and we've now come out with some sort of strategic imperative that we have to do. But the other thing that's also happening along this way is that we are increasingly connecting the dots. We are increasing the connectedness of the information, whether it's raw or structured or unstructured, but we're putting it together with our own experiences and the stuff that's in a machine. So maybe we can use this to think about a new way of modeling and trying to understand and doing our business analysis with a little bit more intelligence. And how do we move from one point to the next? So let's dig a little bit deeper. So into systems thinking. Now, this sounds terribly academic, perhaps, but actually systems thinking has been used in many industries for years. It's typically, though, not part of the BI vocabulary. We often don't talk about systems thinking when we're talking in the BI sense. But as we unpack it, you'll see how completely similar it is. When I talk about a system, try not to think about the computer system, you know, that mainframe or the application running on your iPhone even, not that kind of system. Anything that contains a number of parts is a system. The bicycle that we heard about, that's a system. Your organization is a system. My body is a system. Your family is a system. Perhaps sometimes a little not so functional, but it's a system. And every system has is regulated. And most systems are not static. If the bicycle, obviously when it's standing in the garage, it's a bit static, but as we use it, it becomes, it has inputs and outputs. So in this little very simple diagram, if you imagine the block in the middle, the stock, that is the system. And every system has got inputs and outputs, and we can regulate how those work. Very simple concept in this at a start. Let's take another little look deeper. So there's this thing called a causal loop diagram. It's a very commonly used diagram in the systems thinking world. And I have a little example here of eggs, chickens, and road crossings. I don't know why they cross the road, but there it is. If we look at the green loop, eggs, the more eggs we have, the more chickens we'll have, and the more chickens we'll have, potentially the more eggs we'll have. And so the cycle just turns round and round, and that is what we call a reinforcing loop. In other words, the more we do something, the more we will encourage it, and so it will just progress like that. On the red side, we have what we call a balancing loop. So if some of those chickens happen to be a little adventurous and they attempt to cross the road, some of them, unfortunately, will not make it. And therefore, as chickens cross the road, we'll have less chickens and potentially then less eggs. So as you can see, we have a balancing loop and a reinforcing loop. Pretty simple concept for now. Let's add a few more factors into this. So let's, for example, say that we have very hungry farmers who are going to start eating some of those eggs, or perhaps the health of the chicken. So as we introduce a few more factors into the eggs and the chicken loop, you can see that this very simple diagram starts becoming a little more complicated, and we've introduced some other factors. But we can start seeing quite clearly a little bit more of a cause and effect going on. And that's really what systems thinking helps us to understand. If I twiddle this lever here in my business, ultimately what effect is it going to have further down the line? So I've spoken quite a bit about reinforcing process and balancing process, and I really enjoyed Mike's talk where he was talking about how people can manipulate KPIs. And you know, similarly, we need to have reinforcing KPIs with balancing KPIs. So in other words, we need to make sure that what we're measuring, we can also have a contra-measure to make sure that we don't just end up going down a certain path. I was actually thinking about in the fraud world, you know, we are so risk averse in some organizations that we may feel that we need to assess every single possible chance that there could be fraud. And so perhaps every claim goes through a fraud process, or every new business action goes through a fraud process. But that becomes very expensive on the one hand, and also can really limit and can really affect your customer service on the other hand. I mean, imagine how long your claims would take to process. So again, on the one side, we need to be able to assess fraud and be risk averse, but on the other hand, we need to be realistic about what is actually possible. So let's have another quick look at a slightly more complex but a bit more business-focused causal loop flow. So you look at this diagram and you kind of think, I don't even know where to start looking. And that's actually precisely the point. Because in any business, there isn't really a start and an end to anything. You may say that the start comes from a sales process and so things move down, but they don't really, because a lot of the customers could be repeating customers and things just don't work out so neatly. But perhaps let's have a look at the price. You can see it on the sort of bottom right. If we just look at, in this example, price, and we think, well, if I was to increase the price of my product and people bought it, it would increase my profits. And if I increased my profits, I would be able to produce more stuff in my factories, so my supply would increase. But if I leave it as simple like that, it's not really the end of the story, because as the higher my supply, I might flood the market, and so that might have a negative effect on my price. So I have to be careful around how I move around that loop. Just above price, you'll see the word demand. And similarly there, if the demand rises in the market, it will raise up my price, and so we go. But let's, for example, say that this is my new startup, and it's all been going swimmingly, and now all of a sudden some new entrant comes into the market because the product that I'm producing is easily replicatable. And so now we have a potential imitator who comes with a slightly different price model, and so changes the relative value of my particular product. And so you'll see that as we start introducing more and more of these factors in our organization, we get a better picture of actually what's going on. So how does this relate to BI and data? Well, what it helps us to do is to understand where those things are that we should measure. What are those things that we need to keep a handle on? Because measuring those very high-level numbers of, profit and revenue and turnover are all good and well, but if we don't understand the things, the levers underneath that are turning and making these things happen, we will actually miss the boat. And I've been involved with many organizations over the years that have actually been doing particularly well, very well, and so haven't really kept a handle on why they're doing well and what is happening. And they've been taken out, or they've had a bit of a sort of a dip in all that wellness. So be careful, especially when your company is doing well, that you really understand what all of the factors are that are influencing the profits and the KPIs. I was at a recent conference, and I was introduced to this concept of an OODA loop. We heard a bit about military this morning, and this chap was a colonel in the Air Force, and he came up in the United States Air Force, a military strategist, and he came up with this concept of OODA, which is used by fighter pilots to this day as a kind of model when they're in a conflict situation. And I just thought, wow, that's just so completely similar to what we do. So very simply, an OODA loop stands for observe, orientate, decide, and act. So observe, that's just getting in all of the information, getting all of the observational data coming in, where's the plane coming, which part of the plane am I in, and how is it going to affect me? So from our point of view, just grabbing all that data, certainly no shortage of that. Where the real nugget happens is orientation. So what is this data relevant to me? How am I going to use it? Contextualizing it and deciding what to throw away and what to keep. And then, of course, we need to decide. We can have the data, but if we just produce a whole lot of graphs on the wall, they become so what BI. They just become a whole lot of so what numbers. We need to be able to make that decision, decide what is the best option, and then take action. Now, of course, if you've got an enemy plane on your tail, it's easy to take that action, but quite often we in an organization don't take that action. And there are potentially a number of reasons why. And I would say a couple of reasons are, from a cultural point of view, is it okay to take that leap? Is it okay for people to make that really crazy idea and change and upset the apple cart of all of the sort of so-called knowledge that we've had over the years and really sort of ruffle the feathers a little. Or perhaps we need some kind of incentive, some sort of KPIs to get us to actually change what we need to do. What you'll notice in this little OODA loop is a tiny one in the middle. So you'll see the little word you. Similar. And really, from a competitive point of view, the idea is that you need to have almost a smaller turning circle to your competitors. You need to be able to observe, orientate, decide, and act faster and continuously to stay ahead of the pack. You need to be able to observe and react and observe almost at the same time. Never sit back on your laurels and kind of go, okay, well, I'm done now. I can go and, have a break. It's never done, I'm afraid. And I think just, bringing all of these pieces together, I was thinking about something that moves really fast, that we have to make predictive, understand, we have to analyze a lot of data all the time and really move ahead of the pack. And I was thinking about an ice hockey situation where I'm telling you that is the fastest game I've ever watched. And there's a wonderful analogy in the ice hockey world where they talk about when you're thinking about your next action, don't move to where the puck is, move to where the puck is going. Thank you.